So thanks everybody again for being here for our final session. We saw a lot of photographing things going on, so please share it also on social media. There's the official hashtag for the Arqus conference. So I know that our Instagram account is publishing things, so maybe you'll be featured also. Why not? And apart from the photos, our final session has this title, this presentation of the Arqus Openness position paper.
So the session will be moderated by Professor Rui Vieira de Castro, Rector of the University of Minho. So,
which is there. An applause for
you.
him. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this final session of our conference. I'd like to thank all the participants to be here with us, all professors, students, the non-academic staff. Special thank to the speakers, to the authors of the position paper that we are going to comment, and also to the other contributors to it. And personally, I would like to thank very much the invitation to be here with you, to the opportunity to participate in this, also in the celebration of the 800 years of the University of Padua. I'd like to start these initial words by trying to answer 3 questions that I put to myself. The first one was why position papers produced in the context of an alliance like Arqus. And this is the second question, why position papers in Arqus? And the third question is why a position paper on openness and open science? So, answering the first question, why position papers? These papers are very relevant for organizations because they usually state a point of view on a specific, considered to be relevant topic. They can support a debate, they can support the debate of such a topic through the presentation of substantiated arguments and evidence. And finally, last but not least, they can support sets of practices. Then, why position papers in Arqus? First of all, and this was mentioned already several times during this day, we are a very diverse community. We are diverse in the policies that we adopt in our institutions. We are diverse in our traditions. Some of us get on their shoulders hundreds of years of history. We are also diverse in our institutional practices. But if this is true, it is also true that we are committed to share. We are committed to converge, to collectively build our future. And if this is the case, it becomes obvious the answer to my third question. Why a position paper on openness and open science? The answer is an easy one, and actually it is given in this document, the Arqus mission statement. And I will quote now. Arqus acknowledges that open science can increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and the notion of scientific knowledge as a public good. The quality of trust in and public understanding of science, as well as efficiency, innovation, and wealth. Some notes now on the characteristics of the document that our colleagues will present in just a few moments. I'd like to underline, first of all, the comprehensiveness of the document. And this is made visible by the kind of conceptualization of the idea of openness and open science. It is given a complex, gives a complex definition of these concepts, considering publications, data, infrastructures, citizen science, open education, open innovation. So the idea is to give a broad understanding of what is openness and of what is open science. Then, and this is a very interesting part of the document, there is a clear vision of open science, and I don't resist to quote from the document. The year is 2051. Europe and its knowledge society are thriving thanks to its OS and innovation system. Thanks to open education, lifelong learning is available to all. To solve global problems, citizens, businesses, universities, and many new players collaborate in flexible global networks. Research outputs from universities and public research institutions are distributed online, free of cost. Through a culture of research based on open peer review and open research assessment, researchers are supported in producing high-quality research proposals and publications. Open interconnected infrastructures have emerged from the beginnings of the European Open Science Cloud. Maybe this, some of you can maybe consider this position or this vision too optimistic, but it clearly states the future in which direction we want to, we want to go. The document, maybe it is too optimistic. It needs to be too optimistic. But at the same time, the authors, they clearly identify some tensions that we have to face. Among these tensions are those emerging from the fact that enabling and fostering the implementation of open science practices requires financial and administrative resources. I'd say substantial financial and administrative resources. One fundamental debate, it is also stated, is about how academic research should be made available to society in order to achieve a maximum of impact and benefit in commercial settings or free to access and use. A third area of tension and another controversial issue concerns the extent of intellectual property rights attributed to individual researchers or institutions. And finally, the authors consider the fact that much of the current debate focuses on the concept of academic freedom of research in the open science framework. So these are really tensions with which we have to deal in our institutions and in the context, of course, of Arqus. In spite of this, several guidelines are produced and stated in the document for future developments at different levels: governance, publications, data, methods, infrastructure, citizen science, open education, and open innovation. This is a key feature of this document. It's comprehensiveness. A second feature that I want to underline has to do with its relevance, because it gives us a precise definition of the areas of cooperation that can be explored in the context of the Alliance, and it expresses commitment to a complex process of conceiving, implementing and monitoring open science. In sum, this is a very relevant document, a very helpful document that I'm sure will help a lot to build our Arqus Alliance. So thank you very much to the authors for what they did, for what they put in our hands. I know that some modifications can be introduced, but the work done till now is very relevant for all our community. So thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor De Castro. And we would like to start with the first speaker for this last session, for this today's last session.
Yep, from the University of Lyon, Chérifa Boukacem-Zeghmouri.
We'll talk about open science and career development.
Okay. Yeah, thank you too.
Thank you very much.
Inclusive chair for short people. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. the Moderator, dear colleagues, dear students, thank you so much for your kind invitation to this international event. I'm very honored and I'm very impressed to be here with this talk at this very prestigious university, the Galileo University. So thank you so much. As a preamble, I would like to say to what extent this talk owes to the Arqus team members, researchers and librarians with whom I enjoyed sharing and debating on how the institution of science is questioned by these big challenges and large-scale problems of our society. To start, now, allow me to start with, yes, I can see it here, perfect. Now, allow me to start this talk with a question, which is it the first time, is it the very first time science comes to the rescue of the big challenges of our society, of our civilization? To answer this question, let me invite you to take a quick trip back in time together. Do you know who? So, she is Germaine de Stael, a European woman, a European intellectual woman, a fervent protector of freedom, even in face of Napoleon Bonaparte, who exiled her. Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, depicted her as the pioneer of the open science idea. You will not be surprised to know that I totally agree with him. We owe the first academic formalization of open science, of the idea of open science, to Robert King Merton, the father of sociology of science, with his famous text published in 1942, a very special date, in the middle of the Second World War, titled A Note on Science and Democracy. This text is a founding one to highlight how science encouraged the spread of freedom and of liberal democracy. It returns to the importance of knowledge dissemination in society as a pillar to reduce all forms of populism and totalitarianism. The war in Ukraine today invites us to return to this text, which remains relevant in these troubled times and in these sad times. Let me point out that Paul Allen Davies' work in the early of this millennium on open science clearly showed how the idea is rooted in the European history of patronage, how this constitutes a legacy, and how fragile is it today. Big Science period, to quote Derek John de Sola Price's famous book, has fostered new form of totalitarianism. The period has involved the commodification of science, a phenomenon demonstrated and studied by many scholars. Perhaps some of you, as old as me, remember this chart, this famous association research library diagram showing how high the price of journal subscription was rising in the late of the 90s. It alone summed up the scientific publishing crisis. The convergence of the transformation of the article into commodified unit, the rise of branding mechanism, and the publish or perish rule have called into question intellectual property as public goods and knowledge as common. Maybe the most emblematic and recent example of this was the COVID pandemic, which showed how limited and restricted access to scientific knowledge could be. Even if the mobilization of publishers during the first month of the pandemic was swift and undoubtedly salutary, it still showed the extent of the remained enclosures of science. Now let me show you another diagram. This one, when you look at this amazing rise of number of papers published, you can understand it in different ways. It resonates with the hyper specialization of science, but it is also the effect of acceleration and inflation in the form of scientific production and the pressure of publish or perish. Thinking in papers has become the new opium of the researcher, who sometimes forget to ask about reproducibility, replication, data reuse, and so on. The fundamental question of advancing knowledge and disseminating it sometimes go by the wayside in favor of the question of matrix scores and rankings. And I really, really like this quote of Hannah Arendt on publish and perish phenomenon. The commodification of science knowledge, the constitution of monopolies, and the rise of technological conglomerates are truly the new totalitarians that we are facing today. They erode the impact that the work of scientists can have on their fellow citizens. They limit access to knowledge and scientific culture, which are an essential component of freedom and democracy. So without any irony, what would be the link between the alarm call of a scientific community on global warming, on climate change, repeated 20 years later, the Cambridge Analytica affair questioning the US election campaign, and the Netflix movie broadcasted in December 24th, in Christmas, as a gift, as a present? The answer is undoubtedly synthetic. It is in line with the democratic issue of the circulation of valid, certified knowledge in society, including in the media and digital media. The citizen, the electing citizen, is informed and aware of scientific advances. This is at the heart of these issues. Having said that, we can state that there is a factory of ignorance that urge us to rethink science in its relationship to society. Within the edifice of science, the issue of retraction and replication crisis are certainly the most worrying science because it undermines trust and integrity. It is no more, no less than a step back in the times of the previous ethos of secrecy that prevailed in the 16th century before the very early ideas of enlightenment and the very first openness for formulation. The media are regularly reporting on this. The language and rhetoric used to describe this phenomenon are becoming more and more widespread, with now famous expressions such as science malpractice, predatory publishing, science fraud, and so on. Rethinking science is therefore essential and urgent. To bring us to openness as a proposal for reformulation as for reforming science, this first attempt was initiated in the early the millennium with the concept of e-science or digital science based on digital technology. Its potential and its infrastructure, the role of technology is central here, but its social and epistemological anchorage were insufficiently addressed. The second stage envisaged opening up science to boost innovation, increase economic and social growth, as was mentioned today, and the Royal Society landmark report, Science as an Open Enterprise, is a good illustration of this approach, which consists in reviving the post-war idea of useful science, but this time more oriented toward the economic sector. This utilitarian dimension of science was taken up and developed by the first text of political scope of the European Commission. At that time, the discourse was described as adjunctive, too meta, discursive, too homogenizing, and so on. The top-down approach of the first open science policies were therefore debated, criticized, and even challenged. The limitation of this reformulation proposal was that it did not consider openness as a social praxis. It did not consider the cultural dimension of science, its social structures, and the recognition and assessment mechanism of research that researchers face, which means that the belief in open ethos is not necessarily aligned to the participation in open behaviors. Eppure si muove. This is the famous sentence of Galileo. And yet, science is opening up. It is opening up in a concrete and real way. Science openness can even be measured in France. We have a barometer of open science. A culture of openness is really underway, even if the concepts and terminology are not always clear or precise. Value-based practices and standards are developing. Skills acquired here and there from colleagues and from librarians are developing. The best example I could provide here comes from a recent research I'm involved in. When we interviewed early career researchers on open science, they said they didn't know what it was. But looking more closely at how they carry out their research, we came out to the conclusion they were practicing it. The whole story is that they understand and enact the idea of openness, but do not label it as open science. ECR understanding of openness is completely anchored in the Martinian values of science. It is truly the phenomenon of tacit knowledge that is manifested here. It is also about policy alienation, feeling as many researchers consider policy as being not representative of their realities. This is why openness is, in all its form, has become legitimate research object in its own right, in the affiliation of prize big science, a research object of a multidisciplinary nature. The practice of open science, which makes the entire process of scientific investigation available, is very multiple and is combined at different levels in different activities and in different disciplinary frameworks. The two priority pillars, that of publication and research data, occupy an important place from the point of view of the actors and stakeholders they involve, typically the case of funding agencies. What I consider as the second generation of open science policy that started with the Amsterdam Call for Action in 2016 are precisely reframing policy, trying to consider the admittedly contrasting reality of open science practices, lack of researcher incentives, and the academic system credit. The most recent policy are nourished by bottom-up approaches and take more account of the social construction modes of knowledge in the digital age. The better acknowledge the need for differentiated approaches between disciplinary fields. They are also more supportive of the issue of training and skills, but above all, they address the crucial issue of rebuilding the social contract between science and society, which must be rethought outside the power relation of the market. Research evaluation, time for recognition. In the most recent development of these policies, a subject that has been forgotten for too long, even though it is one of the most difficult obstacles, that of the recognition of the researchers' open practices as a contribution to science in its own right. It is about giving up on the publish or perish rule and indicators and much more. The integration of openness in the research evaluation exercise, the recognition of a broader definition of scientific production and output. France, in the context of its European presidency, has made a commitment and has made this a battle horse with Europe. The end of the on-merit research program, led by Tony Ross-Hallower, a colleague from Graz, gives reason to this approach. He recently published a paper that we can truly welcome as a manifesto. Now, after the Paris call on research assessment, after the Open Science European Conference held in Paris in February this year, a reform of the research assessment system is underway. A European coalition has formed around the Paris call. Within this framework, it is now playing the role of facilitator and has defined a drafting group for the coalition agreement. Karen Strubans, member of the drafting group, recognized that there is still a long way to go to achieve this goal. The recent definition of open science proposed by the UNESCO and mentioned this morning, if I remember well, considers the value of science as defined by Robert Merton, the challenges of digital infrastructures that are essential to collaborative and globalized dimension of modern science, and the societal challenges that we see all too often in our news and actualities. University alliances such as Arqus implement this and show in an unprecedented way how alliances can be the best response, how alliances can be a leverage. Now, let me conclude this talk by asking another question. Finally, could we not ask ourselves whether open science is not just science as it should be, as we would like it to be? Grazie a tutti per la vostra attenzione. Ringrazio particolarmente l'Università di Padova e il Consorzio Arqus per l'organizzazione di questo seminario. Grazie.
So, thank you very much to Professor Boukacem-Zeghmouri. Grazie, also for your words in Italian, much appreciated.
Yeah, we continue with our next speaker, which actually are two from the University of Graz. We're glad to introduce you Hildrun Walter and Christian Kayer. So please join us in the stage. Thank you very much, with an applause.
Everybody, thank you for being here with us also after this long day. I'm very happy and honored to talk here about our position paper. Thank you very much for this kind introduction to the topic and to its importance. And I'm very honored also to speak on behalf of our task force. So it's not just the two of us. We are a much bigger working group, so thank you. I will talk about our development and our working process to achieve this document. And as a starting point in 2019, we had a project description of the Arqus Erasmus Plus project. And it told us that the mission is to establish a task force to enhance open science and citizen science, accompanied by the following tasks. So, to establish a task force with at least one expert from each institution, to meet regularly in order to work on a sustainable strategy on how to deal with open science issues, to include open access, open data, the European Open Science Cloud and citizen science within this document, and to develop a position paper and present it at the annual conference. So here we are. How did we arrive there? So we have different milestones. We started with surveys on the term of citizen science and open science, of course, on the status quo at the Arqus institutions for their implementation. Then we established this task force, which had more than 35 persons involved. And so it was a big issue to get to know each other, since COVID affected us all, and it was all in digital mode. And to get to know 30 people at the once or at the time is rather difficult. So we started to topic-oriented working groups. Yeah, so it was about best practice for infrastructures. It was about citizen science. It was about awareness and teaching. And of course, we looked for all these important documents from various institutions, not last but not least the UNESCO. And we established in the end also a co-author team to be more agile and dynamic than with this 35 people. So we developed groups of 2 persons that were dedicated to one element of the open science, and they worked on aims and recommendations, and then we came together and discussed. And so what we had were different text blocks, elements, issues. We had terms and documents outside, and Christian and I started to gather all this and to build a document out of it. And this paper draft was then sent to our task force and to several other stakeholders at our universities, and we asked for feedback. And we came up, I'm very happy about this, we came up with our position paper. So here you see most of our 14 core contributors. And what is important, I think, is that we have so many perceptions of open science inside of these people. So we have academic staff as well as researchers here. We have librarians. We have research support persons. We have professors on software and infrastructure. So this was very diverse and very interesting to work together. Yeah, here I want to show some pictures about the workflow, because what I liked very much was the idea that we had somehow to envision and also to visualize this very diverse topic with so many branches. And so we really took paper and pen and wrote it down and somehow tried to arrange. So you can't move it around as in the digital version. So you really have to become more clear where does it stick together. And this was very helpful. And then we came up with a very, very crowded version of our Open Science Cosmos, where we integrated lots of terms and ideas. And we sent it to our colleagues, to the 7 universities, and asked for feedback. How should we manage this? How should we integrate all this? Where should we go? And what we get as answer were 7 different approaches and ideas of how we should conceptualize all this. And it was a main part of the work also to see where are common goals, where are common perceptions, what are the differences and why are they here? And how should we come to a good compromise, not losing all the important ideas. So this was just to give a little bit overview of our workflow. When developing our paper, we started with the idea of a policy document. So we started with different chapters that are found in those documents. And then we somehow rearranged this according to the importance, the implications they have, and also the commitment that is needed. And so the vision that was first in the annex became such an important element for our working together for the Alliance, as it also was mentioned, thank you. And so it became a main part of the document. The definition first had some neighboring concepts. So we had open science as a core definition, together with citizen science, open education, and open innovation as neighboring concepts. However, when discussing and working together, we perceived that it's so important to think all these processes together, since they can benefit from each other. And so we decided, we decided to integrate them to the core definition and the broad concept of open science. The unintended negative consequences, as we called it first, were discussed, and we thought that it's nicer to call them areas of tensions, and since it's also somehow a mandate to discuss it, to look where are the problems, what can we do about it, where can we shift something to get further, and to benefit from it as universities and as University Alliance. Then we have the achievement part, so a demonstration that we not start from the scratch, but we have already some examples and how we can further it. But since this document is then rather special, we thought these examples can be put in the annex. And of course, the whole process was guided by why should we do open science. And this somehow evolved into our Open Science Cosmos graphic. And we think this is a very important one, and also my main outcome of our document. So here it is, finally, and I will present the final structure. So we have the preamble, the vision, a future with open science, the definition, the areas of tension, the aims and recommendations, the validity, and the annex with the achievements of our institutions. And to Christian Kaya will give a more deep view into our position paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Hildrun. I would like to continue. I would really like to continue with a few details on our concept of open science and our open science cosmos that contains aims and values commonly associated with open science. What you see here are the 11 elements of open science that we identified as a group. I will explain that in a minute. Okay. And we built sort of various spheres around this term and concept of open science. First, there are immediate aims, including inclusiveness, transparency, collaboration, and others. The ones that should be the first to be affected positively by open access, open science, sorry. Then there are more remote, overarching aims, such as knowledge society, democracy, engaged citizens that should be helped and fostered also by open science. Okay. Thank you. And finally, as the outermost sphere, values. Values that we think can be fostered by implementing and practicing open science. It was also important to us that the illustration can be read both ways, meaning inside out as well as outside in, starting with the values such as trust, equity, diversity. Because the way you interpret or the way you prioritize the values may impact the very notion of open science and the very transition to open science. The list of terms contained here is not exhaustive. We gathered it together from various documents, discussed them in our group, and we think that it may change over time, but this is the best we came up with, and that's our result as a group. So, coming to the 11 elements of open science we identified. These are governance, publications, typically addressed as open access, data, including fair data or open data, research data management plans, infrastructures such as repositories, methods, awareness and training, evaluation, including open metrics, research assessment, open peer review, and others, communication, and the three already mentioned, citizen science, open education, and open innovation that we first considered to be neighboring concepts, but the very concept of open science is still very much in development, and we decided to include these three also in the core concept. Just to pick one area to show you how we went with this central part of aims and recommendations within the openness position paper. The aims are meant to provide guidance for an open science transformation of the Alliance. They were customized to the Alliance, inspired, again, by other documents, because there is a vision of the European University Association that's called Universities Without Walls. There's a Lehrbuch position paper on open science. There's the famous and very important UNESCO recommendations on open science and others. So we are not building this from scratch, but we customized it to the Alliance in our discussions. This slide shows the aims for the awareness and training element, dealing with issues such as education, information resources, and curricula. So this is the aims part, and this is the following. These are the following recommendations that are meant to show concrete guidance and concrete steps to tackle the aims. They suggest concrete action that should be taken and include creating a central open science website for researchers, offering training courses, and introducing open science prizes within Arqus as a reward and also as a tool to raise awareness for open science practices. The next slide, the visualization, is not part of our position paper. This is just to illustrate that. Anything I'm doing wrong? Yeah, sure. Thank you. Look. Sorry for that. This slide is just to show by the example of the University of Graz that open science is a strategic issue that involves many actors and stakeholders across the universities and is everything else than easy to implement. You can find here not only the rectorate and researchers, obviously, but also a whole lot of other actors, including existing initiatives. In the case of the University of Graz, this would be a digital humanities initiative and a social science data service, including also the Doctoral Academy, the Library International Office, Research Support Office, and others. And just think about the very problem or challenge of getting all these together and getting all these aligned and talk to each other on the topic of open science. This is to illustrate the complexity of the issue of the actual implementation of this change process. Chances and challenges. To sum it up, this activity, the openness activity in Arqus, presented to us a unique opportunity to work together and to reflect on openness as an international alliance of universities with different backgrounds, different people involved from different departments, obviously, different approaches and histories, and we are proud that we managed to guide the discussion process in a way that we are now here, standing here, presenting a result. Obviously, and I'm not the first one to state this, our collaboration was massively obstructed by the pandemic. We had over 30 meetings as an openness task force or as a co-author team. Online collaboration is certainly not comparable to in-person discussions. We somehow managed, but it was difficult to get to know each other and to get to know the different roles of all the people involved. This was really, for a long time, intransparent for us, and we had to struggle to get an impression of who these people are with whom we are accepting this challenge. As for the future, we are now fulfilling our task of the openness activity, standing here, being honored in an incredible setting, and having you listening to our results. Still, of course, a position paper should not be an end in itself. As has already been mentioned, we are happy to be useful, as it seems, with the position paper to Arqus RI and the work package on open science there, and also other work packages, possibly. We actually hope that we will be, that the position paper will be useful in actually implementing open science as a strategic principle in Arqus institutions, and that it can inspire institutional policies in Arqus universities where there are none yet. So there are 2 or 3 of them across Arqus, but quite a few of Arqus institutions do not have an open science policy, and our position paper may serve as support for the topic, for orientation. Finally, and we are really looking forward to that, we hope that the position paper will inspire discussions not only within the Alliance, but also beyond. We found out that not each Alliance, by far not each Alliance, has set itself the objective of creating such a position paper on openness. And we do think that this is such an important and huge future-oriented topic that others will have to deal with this topic as well, and maybe our position paper can be of help also for them. This is the thank you slide, and it comes. Thank you. Not quite finished yet. I have a list of people to thank. I'll try to keep it short. First of all, our co-authors, as Hildrun has already mentioned, it's a huge team, and we are lucky to have them. It would not have been possible to create this document without all of them. The reviewers, we would like to thank the reviewers and all those who gave feedback on the document. We would like to thank our Vice Rector, Petra Schaper-Winkel, for providing us with a great vision for the document that we could use, and it's very inspiring and really gives a focal point to the whole position paper. And we would like to thank, of course, Professor Vieira de Castro for his feedback on the document earlier on, for his kind words today. Chérifa, to you as well, a great talk. Thank you so much for providing us with the context. And I would also like to thank Dr. Ruth Ladenheim, who will be next on stage and tell us a bit more about the topic of openness from her perspective. Thank you very much.
Thanks again for this final and an explanation on the paper. We know we are all a little tired, but we have, of course, our final guest, and then we are going to wrap it up the things for continue also our activities for today. So some final thoughts for our last guest of today.
So we invited to the floor Dr. Ruth Ladenheim, former State Secretary in the Ministry of Research and Director General of the Centro Interdisciplinario de Estudios in Ciencia, Tecnología, Innovación de Buenos Aires. Sorry for my bad Spanish. But she is also one of the members of our International Advisory Board. So thank you so much.
So thank you, everybody, and thanks to be here at this final session. I want to, first of all, thank the members of Arqus to having me on the International Advisory Board, since I come from the Global South, from Argentina, so it's a feature of inclusion of Arqus also. So I would like to thank that and remark that. So I will try to be short and just make small comments about the position paper. So first of all, try to highlight that the position paper presents values, principles, and standards shared by the Arqus Alliance and highlights common aims and recommendations on how to achieve them. So for me, it has been a very important effort of coordination and meetings, such as Hildrun and Christian have described. So I really appreciate also the honesty of showing also the tensions and the complexities that exist in the building of a community of openness, such as, for example, the administrative burdens that are there and to other administrative burdens that already exist, and the problem of academic freedom of the researchers that want to choose where to publish, open or not open, and also the big issue of how research reaches society through the commercial application of results, and therefore there you have to be careful and protect and use the intellectual property rights, or directly, if you can, just share results. It depends on the discipline, it depends on the results. Sometimes it's also a tension because it's a tension inside the brain of the researcher. What my results would be, commercially applied or not. So it's interesting. So when I read the paper, I needed to make this map that I want to share with you because it's such a complex cosmos, the opening. So when the first question that I wanted to ask is, for whom is openness? For whom? What are the different beneficiaries of openness? So first of all, the community of researchers. So what is in red there is all the cosmos of researchers, and then you have research and innovation. The open research is there in red, but it's also to the right, you see the society and the education community, like they are also beneficiaries of openness. So I put this here because I wanted not just to comment the interesting position paper, but also to think on future actions and lines about, in order to continue this interesting group and these interesting efforts of an open position paper. So for me, and that I was discussing with them, the next step would be think about measuring. Can we measure the effort of opening science? So I would like to show you, I found this paper in the literature, which is people from Delft Institute of Applied Mathematics and the Center of Science and Technology Studies from Leiden University, which is also in belonging to Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And they have just begun to develop indicators of openness, which is not easy because you have to standardize, you have to be clear about what is openness for these people which measure the proportion of open access publication with respect to the total publications. And they have compared, for example, here, different countries. And what we see there, the colored dots are the proportion of open access publication of each university at each country. So what we can see here is that there are countries that are much open than others, but there are also a huge amount of differences between universities inside the same country. So look at the case of the United States, where you have universities that are opening 10–15% of their publications, and others which are reaching 90%. So it's a very heterogeneous photograph of openness. So I wanted to show that because it's an example of measuring. And I was wondering, and I would like to perhaps open the discussion after this panel about, is it possible to measure, is it good to measure openness or the use of open science publications? How many of them are downloaded? How many of them are read? In which disciplines? We can also study the impact of openness. So, for example, is there a consequence of, for example, in productivity of researchers? Are those who are more open more productive? Or is there an increase in collaborations after openness? Or are there new communities being built? Or is people opening science more able to find funding opportunities, or building interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary projects, and so on and so on? So we can perhaps think of measuring this kind of productivity. So the first thing to do would be to take a photograph, such as we say in economics, the baseline. Take a photograph of what or how much all these indicators of how they are today, and try to measure them year by year and try to see how they are improving or not. So what I wanted to tell also is that evaluation is something that also is related to open science, because we have the possibility of the open peer review, which is something that is very interesting, the traceability of all the process of evaluation, the transparency. So this is also may have also consequences on different aspects of research production. And of course, we have the possibility of measuring those groups that are able to share early the data of the results of their, for example, the laboratory results. And this is also an interesting experience. So there are many, many ways of measuring and trying to take photographs of how open science is going through the Arqus Alliance. So just some remarks, some final remarks. I have spoken about open science, monitoring and measuring is something also related to open science, because we can think that perhaps the first criticism on traditional ways of measuring or evaluating science was related to taking measures. So openness, it does not mean that measures are out. Measures are always there. The thing of standardization, we were thinking also that you need to standardize different dimensions of open science in order to be able to measure. So perhaps when you want to standardize, you have to be careful and differentiate what standards are in each discipline, because it's not the same kind of standards when you differentiate per discipline. So it's a complex and very detailed work. Well, I would like to finish with something that is here that I didn't comment, which is the feedback. Those lines, those curves that I put under the publications are the feedback, the positive feedback that is expected to be there. For example, at the left side, we can imagine that some open science could elicit new open innovation projects where companies are involved, or open science to the right side can reach society more easily. So, for example, elicit new citizen science projects, or try to develop new education materials or processes, innovative processes. So this is a sort of positive feedback, and it's not an arrow because it's in both sides. It's from down to top and also top down, because science is being also, it has a feedback from society through openness to those buildings of communities, or also from education communities. So it's in both directions. And that's why I would like to finish with a cite coming from the definition of Arqus. I found out that when you have chosen the Arqus way of designing this alliance, I found out that the text is, why Arqus? Because the idea is building bridges toward a shared future to respond to the grand global societal challenges. And also in different documents, mission statements, Arqus aims to enhance the research and innovation dimension of the Alliance's activities and to address current global societal challenges. So this main purpose of reaching society is in the soul of the Arqus Alliance. I don't know if in other alliances, but I see that clearly openness and Arqus are closely related. So that's why I thought that it's not by chance that perhaps, I don't know if there are others, but I didn't see any other position paper. I don't know if it's by chance, but I think it's something that consciously or not, it's interesting that you succeeded in developing a common view just in the openness area. So this, I think, is very good and very promising, because it's a way of translating the purpose of the construction of the Alliance, reaching society, with the openness as a tool. So thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Dr. Ladenheim, for your final remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm sure you all see that time is really running out, so we have to finish up this final session. And we want to thank you, all the speakers, for their participation and intervention to our podium and our journey, our day to day, and also you for being here, listening and taking part of the discussion, of course. But the day is not finished yet.
No, we still have things to do.
It's not a threat, but
Exactly. You can rest a little bit, but we will see each other at 8 o'clock at Caffè Pedrocchi. So you will participate at the ceremony for awarding the Teaching Excellence Awards. So we are really looking forward to that moment, and we hope that you do too. And also,
there's the Gala Dinner after that.
Yes.
So we are supposed to have some relaxed chat, a glass of wine or an alcoholic something if you don't like wine. But we suggest a glass of wine. And of course, tomorrow at 12:30, there's the conclusion part of all the conference. And so you are invited to join us here for our final thoughts and final thinking together.
so see you later. Please remember your app and your QR code to enter the dinner. And I'm really sure that we're going to have a lovely evening together. Thank you very much for your effort, for your participation, and for everything.
Bye.
Thank you.